Our speaker tonight, Ioannis Katsimbaris. Am I pronouncing your last name right? If I were to try to do an introduction to him, it would take about half an hour for all of the places that he studied and all of the places that he works and all the places that he's been and all of the volunteer work that he's done. But he's our own, and in that regard, he doesn't need an introduction. However, before we get to that, I forgot something important. It's Dan Jadel's birthday. Happy birthday, Dan.
Happy birthday, Dan.
Okay, and so Yanni was a personal friend, or I should say, Saint Arsenios was a personal friend to Yanni's family. And, how do we understand how God arranges these things? But because of his connection to Saint Paisios, did I say the wrong thing? Because of Yanni's connection to Saint Paisios, we have a special blessing in our parish and in our city. And so without further ado, please give your undivided attention to Yannis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's actually lots of pressure to see so many people here. I would have been happier if you would have watched individually, so I wouldn't see you. Okay. My name is Ioannis Katsimbaris, and I'm here today to talk about a monk I knew from my childhood. From my childhood years, a person that was a friend of the family, whose father, Paisios, was a very good friend of my grandfather, a very modest monk I always had respect for. A monk who I always remembered talking calm but full of life, talk simple, but I could feel words full of meaning. Next picture, please. I have my wife helping me out with the so sorry about that. So I want to warn you that Father Paisios is very personal to me, and although I promised my wife not to get emotional, I don't always keep my promises. I always was an outspoken child. I shouldn't start now. I felt that I should listen more than talk when Ascetic, or later Father Paisios, was in the house of the city, years before he achieved, with good reason, the fame that we know today. I want to make clear from the beginning that I'm not a theologian, I'm not a historian, neither deeply religious. I happen to be born to a family whose heritage is from Konitsa, a town in in the northwest region of Greece. It's about 35 miles northwest of Ioannina, and it's the geopolitical and administrative capital of the area. The next one. I've never lived in Konitsa myself. Konitsa was the center of my summers. My grandparents, from my father's side, lived there. My father grew up and went to school in Konitsa until he passed Greek university entrance exams and enrolled into the Bank University in Athens, and left Konitsa to go study and serve in the army. The Ascetic family were neighbors of my grandparents. Protos Ascetic was a good friend of my grandfather Yanni. Ephraim Ascetic was a good friend of my grandmother Maria. My grandfather and Mr. Ascetic both fought together in the same military unit against the intruding Italians in 1940, fought in the same resistance events during the German occupation of Greece, and fought together in the National Army during the Greek Civil War. They were also church supporters, being active in the same parish of St. Nicholas, the metropolis of Konitsa, and donating and helping whenever needed. The Ascetic kids were always around my father's house, were substantially older than my father, but would always come to ask my grandfather for advice or help, especially if the Protos Ascetic passed away. Arsenis, the sixth child of the family, was very faithful and dedicated to our Orthodox religion from small on. I will repeat small parts of his biography since I believe that they are important to my connection to him and his later development. I will repeat small parts of his biography as I said. Arsenis Ascetic named Ascetic after his monk initiation, and later Paisios named by Simeon, the elder in Mount Athos, was born in Farasa, a town in Cappadocia, nowadays Turkey, on July 25th, 1924. He was the son of Prodromos, interestingly enough, meaning the forerunner, and Evlogia, meaning the blessed. We have to keep in mind that those were very tumultuous times and catastrophic for the Greeks of Minor Asia. The Ottoman Empire had fallen apart after the First World War, but the so-called new Turks under Atatürk and İnönü recognized the state, attacked the Greek army, and pushed the Greeks out of Minor Asia. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, implemented by the great powers of the time, called for a population exchange, an ethnic cleansing of the Greek population of Minor Asia. The Greeks of Farasa had to leave their homeland of over 3,000 years for the Greek mainland if they wanted to survive. The ascetic hieromonk Arsenios was the spiritual leader of the town, the priest, the teacher, the doctor, and the protector. In the preparation of abandoning Farasa, Arsenios dug in the ground all the ecclesiastical belongings such as books, icons, silver, etc., that could not be carried away, and asked to baptize all the unbaptized children so that they can receive a blessing in case they perish in the refugee trail. He baptized the little newborn, his Nephilis child, at 13 days of age, and 1 week before abandoning Farasa. He gave him his own name, Arsenios, explaining that he should be the bearer of his legacy. The hieromonk later was canonized as Saint Arsenios of Cappadocia. By the way, I was reminded by my friend Christina, who's here today, that hieromonk Arsenios was known to baptize children with names that were rare and did not have certain dates of name day celebrations, because the Greeks would celebrate the name days elaborately with a lot of alcohol and dancing, and that proved many times to be lethal, since these days were used by the Turkish criminal gangs and intruders to attack and loot the village. Hieromonk Arsenios was known for his wisdom, which saved the Farasa numerous times. Father Paisios, or Arsenios, grew up as a child knowing and realizing the weight of carrying Saint Arsenios' name. He has confirmed that this was the main reason he turned into reading Synaxaria, books about the lives of Saint Arsenios and other saints. Early in his childhood, the Synaxaria, where his love it was like, when I was reading comic books when I was a kid, they used to tell me that's how Father Arsenios, Father Paisios used to read the Synaxaria. He once said, either his blessing, meaning Saint Arsenios' blessing, worked on me becoming a monk, or he foresaw the gift I had. Either way, it proves that Saint Arsenios was a holy man. Father Paisios always felt that he had a big burden to carry to prove himself worthy of carrying Saint Arsenios' name. He used to say to my grandfather that he feels he's near him in all decisions he makes, and that he always is omnipresent. After the Farasa made it to the coast, more than a month walking to Messina, they boarded a ship to Piraeus. They were sent to various places such as Kerkira, Despotia, until they settled in Konitsa about 2 years later in 1926. The policy, I have a water, thank you, I ordered. It doesn't work. The policy of the Greek state was to send refugees of abandoned Turkish villages or settlements. Remember that under the Treaty of Lausanne, population exchange was enforced. Konitsa had a population of around 3,000 people, of which 1/3 were Muslims, primarily of Turkish descent. They left for mainland Turkey, and their houses and land were handed over to the refugees from Farasa by the Greek government. Prodromos of Nephilis was a long-time town leader in Farasa and overlooked the resettlement. He was widely respected by the Farasiotes and was until his death their spokesman also in Konitsa. These Nephilis were given a lot of a deceased Greek who had no descendants in the middle part of town, although the majority of the Farasiotes was settled in the lower part of town where the Turco-Mahalar was, the area where the Turks had been living. Mr. Prodromos had told my grandfather that his real name was Theodosiou. Excuse me, I jumped over him. Sorry. I don't know. So, that his real name was Theodosiou, but he had changed it because the Turks were looking for him to kill him. He wanted to change back to his original name in Greece, but the procedure was too cumbersome and expensive, and and so he kept the Ascetic's name. The house they settled in, is 200 yards from the house of my father, which my grandfather bought in 1936. My grandparents bought this house when my grandfather, a lumberjack and wood merchant, auctioned the forest of Stomimo from the municipality of Konitsa in 1935 for the period of 5 years. My grandmother lived in the village of Istrato, where my grandfather was also the mayor, but since Konitsa had become the center of my grandfather's business, he moved my grandfather along with a newborn father of mine to Konitsa. The two towns were 35 miles apart. Note that there was no car road leading to this back in the day. My grandmother Maria made good friends in the neighborhood and had around mostly with Mrs. Evlogia, since they were both considered immigrants by the Konitsiotes. Evlogia was a refugee from Minor Asia, and my grandmother Evlata from another village. My grandfather would leave for days on the mountain at his sawmill, and Mr. Evlogia in the valley, working the land from morning till dawn. This gave my grandmother and Evlogia a lot of time together, needle knitting or crocheting. I would like at this point to mention that Konitsa was liberated from the Turks on the 24th of February 1913. Two of the three main chieftains, or Cappadocia, who led the liberation with 300 men from Istrato, were my two grandparents, Ioannis and Ioannis Katsimbaris. In honor of God helping them liberate the town after 500 years of Turkish occupation, they built together with two other families a little church, a little chapel, an exoklisi, dedicated to Agia Varvara, Saint Barbara, the patron saint of the artillery. This exoklisi, Agia Varvara, is 50 minutes walking in the forest west of the town, of the center of town, and lies at the edge of the mountain on a very scenic location, allowing for a panoramic view of the town and the valley. The house of my grandparents is on the path to the little chapel. This was the chapel young little Arsenios would love to retreat every afternoon when he was a child and later a teenager, sitting in church and praying, or in the little chapel and praying, or just enjoying the soothing panoramic view of the valley. We're going to see a little YouTube video now of that little chapel because it was one of the main poles of Saint Arsenios' youth, and where he would go back all the time in his life. Andrea? Yeah. Yes. Not this one. Yeah. Yes, that one. The left one. Not this one. Not this one. Not this one. Okay. Good. And this is Irodanipli, by the way. I didn't make the video, but I think it's very nice. Those icons, okay. So, the house on the left with the orange is the house of my father. I didn't make this YouTube video, by the way. I found it on YouTube. So this is our house on the left, and that's where the path goes to the chapel of Santa Barbara. It's a 3-minute YouTube video, so just bear with me. This path, I just Paisios, or back then, Saint Arsenios. The path is the same as it was 100 years ago. So this chapel was built in 1920, and this is the path the way it was. That's a little axida that was built by Father Apostolos from Konitsa. My family has donated the whole renovation of the area together with the Katsimbaris family. We sort of feel obliged to take care of this chapel. So this is where Arsenios, Father Paisios, would always go and sit. Actually, we have a corner and we'll see later. And there is a cave in the back where later on, when he came as a monk, he used to sit in the cave for days with a little piece of bread, and that's all he ate. Those are the Nemetsica Mountains in the back. That's already northern Iberian, so it's already Albanian. That's the cave where Father Paisios used to sit, especially when he was or he would sit in the chapel. Until today, whoever comes in the chapel rings the bell so people know there's someone up there. And this is the place where you always sit as a child and look down at the valley. That's Saint Arsenios up there. Nothing has changed in here except the iconographies that were done about 25 years ago. So they would sort of refresh because of the candles, they would get darker and darker. So that's the only thing that we have changed with the chapel. The wood and everything is the same from day one, 100 years ago, 105 years ago right now. So after today, also children run up to the church. It's about 15 minutes from the last neighborhood. My little nephew runs up there whenever we're in the summer. It's a game they play. Who will go first? And the child used to run up there. And Father Paisios used to ask me when I used to visit him, Ioannis, if the path is still okay and if people are taking care of the church. Anyway. Arsenios used to greet my grandmother Maria passing by the house on his way to Ioannis, where my grandmother would sit in the front porch. My grandmother told me that many times when it would start getting dark, Mrs. Regia would come and sit with her on the front porch chatting until Arsenios would come back from Ioannis. He would go 2 to 3 times a day to light the candles, add olive oil, or clean up the church and so on. I must add that it is normal up to this day to make a daily walk through the scenic forest path to Ioannis, to venerate the icons, enjoy the marvelous view on the valley, and ring the small bell, a sign for the town to know that someone is up there and the church is taken care of. I would also like to point out that my sister Barbara, who is the first one of the family, was named after the little chapel. Was named after the little chapel. Although the tradition in Ibiros says that the first girl is named after the grandmother, mother of the father, my grandmother Maria wanted that my sister be named after Ioannis due to the history of this little chapel with our family. Note that our family is one of the 2 families that still is responsible to take care of the chapel, and traditionally on December 4th, when the name day of Ioannis is celebrated, our house will be open for all passerbys who stop on the way back from the name day liturgy, get a lugumi, a piece of pita, some mezze, and have a traditional cipro or cognac. Unfortunately, being in the US, it doesn't work like that since a couple of years, but that was a tradition. There's 2 other families that keep it up when we're not there. My grandfather has told me that when it would rain and Arsenios would be at the chapel, his mother would wait at our house until the rain would stop, and he would appear from the woods. Several times my grandfather or one of his brothers would run up, of the brothers of Arsenios, would run up to the chapel to get him. Behind the chapel, there are still a couple of caves in which he would cuddle and pray and enjoy the rain. He enjoyed nature and the outside a lot since the time he was a child, and would blend in with nature. Later, he was known for communicating with various animals. He would meet in the woods, such as the bear, the famous snake that would come visit him in the water springs in the Stony Monastery, a little wolf that would come and sit close to him, and he would talk to them and pray with him, as he liked to say. Both his siblings, as well as my grandfather, were telling me that he loved reading, and he started concentrating on the Holy Bible and the Synopsaria from very young on. The war found him as a teenager in Konitsa, with all the fears a young adult had. He found tranquility in praying, even when the situations were very extreme. I want to share an incident told to me by one of his teenage friends, Ioannis Katsimbaris, who also happens to be a first cousin-in-law of my mother-in-law and fellow students. Arsenios' brothers had enrolled in the royalist partisan resistance RS, as well as Ioannis' father, Konitsa was dominated by Hellas partisans who primarily belonged to the Communist Party and opposed the desk. One captain of theirs came to the house of Paisios one day and recruited Arsenios along with his friends Ioannis and Ioannis to transport some ammunition to a partisan group in Burazani, about an hour walk in the valley of Konitsa. The three friends, not really having a choice, mounted the backpacks and took off in the middle of the night to walk to the location they were supposed to deliver the ammunition on the banks of the river Ioannis. Once they met the connecting partisan and delivered, they started walking back, where to their surprise, the partisans from across the river started shooting at them. It was an ambush. Ioannis and Yorgos jumped behind some large rocks to protect themselves. Arsenios, though, was frozen. He bent down to his knees and started praying. Ioannis was screaming to him to duck down and seek coverage, but Arsenios was not listening, did not seem to hear him at all. He went on with his prayers as loud as he could. A few minutes later, which seemed endless to Ioannis, the partisans stopped shooting, either because they ran out of bullets and had to refill, or because they thought that they had killed him. Arsenios turned around and with fear in his voice called on Ioannis and Yorgos to run with him. Ioannis told my wife Andrea and I that the bullets were hitting the ground around Arsenios, were hitting stones around him, but not one bullet hit him. Arsenios said later that he was not hearing anything but his prayer. In the war, when he ran back to save another French soldier, Mr. Pantelis from Kekera, who had fallen behind during the battle, his comrade said laughingly, "He does not fear bullets, he only fears God." That proved more true than they thought. At this point, I want to mention that, as most of you know, I got to know Andrea here at this church. Although I knew her mother's side was from Konitsa, it took us more than a year to find out that Ioannis Katsimbaris, one of Father Paisios' childhood friends, and his wife Asimina, a family friend of my parents, a couple I knew since I was a toddler, was related to my nowadays wife Andrea as the first cousin of her mother Anne. I can't neglect the feeling that Father Paisios' spirit is omnipresent, somehow everywhere in my life. Arsenios was eventually called to serve in the Greek army. He told me that when I would be called to serve, I should, just like him, go and light a candle at a Yevapara and say a little prayer. He told me that I worked with him. He served in the Army Communications Unit and did not have to kill anyone. He was very worried about that since he was serving in the middle of the war. Can we have a picture of this soldier? He had a gift to relate everything happening around us to prayer and God. He said once, while serving in the army at the battlefront during the war, when we were in continuous communication with the center of command, we were actually feeling safe. When we communicated only every couple of hours, we felt unsafer. When we communicated only twice a day, we felt abandoned. The same happens with prayer. The more we pray, the more spiritual safety we feel. Prayer is safety. If we are in a continuous communication with God, we can prevent any evil. After the war, although he wanted to go to Ioannis and become an ascetic monk, he returned to Konitsa, where he worked as a carpenter in order to help his family. His two brothers were still serving in the army, and his father was getting older. He was buying wood for my grandfather, who supplied most of the area with wood, and as a carpenter, he needed a lot. He would also volunteer at the orphanage at the Ioannis Foundation School, a Boston-based foundation, which today I'm a member of the Board of Trustees, where he would take groups of orphan children to a Yevapara every evening after work. He read to them the Bible and taught them to chant. On Ioannis Paisios Day, many of those children, old men and women now, come to Konitsa to chant. Come to Konitsa to chant in a Yevapara in the new Saint Arsenios church. He left Konitsa for Ioannis after 3 years, after his brothers returned from the army. We have the next picture, please. After being initiated as a monk, receiving the name of Paisios and later Paisios by Elder Simon, and spending 3 years in various monasteries and stitas, he became sick and was sent back to Konitsa by his elders in order to cure his lung issues, which burdened him a long time, actually through his whole life. In Konitsa, he found refuge again in his beloved Yevapara, the chapel where he always felt comfort. Now, though, he would stay there for days, living on a piece of dry lahana, the dry bread, and spending endless hours praying and chanting. That is when he started thinking about retreating to the Stomian monastery. Stomian monastery dedicated to Panagia, about 2 hours walk from Konitsa, was built in 1442, was renovated in 1770, and was destroyed and burned down at the German Wehrmacht in 1943. Father Paisios asked for permission from the Metropolitan of Konitsa to rebuild the burnt down monastery. Not many people believed in him. Nonetheless, he started on his own, partly carrying wood and building material on his back until he managed to encourage the Konitsiotes to volunteer and help him. My grandfather Ioannis had at that time a sawmill about 1 hour walk north of the monastery on the Dinfi mountain. He employed about 15 men from Konitsa and other villages. Father Paisios used to come in the evenings and stay with him at the campfire and talk with him about their problems, read them the Bible, pray with him, and even take confessions. He was very beloved by the lumberjacks. When they would get worried about him walking back at night, he would tell them that he does not fear the animals. They are his friends. He was telling me the story of him meeting a bear that hung around the area, and although he was very scared the first time, he started praying and chanting some hymns, and the bear sat down and did not move. He had similar encounters with a wolf and a snake that would come to the fountain in the monastery. He told me repeatedly to live with nature, try to be part of it and not work against it. We are all creatures of God. We all have our place on earth as God's creations. My grandfather donated the wood needed to rebuild the monastery in 1958. The cement and other building materials were donated by various other Konitsiotes families and friendly families from Farasa, and the monastery was rebuilt by volunteers led by Father Paisios. This is him in 1958. Yes, okay. No, I think maybe we can see the video of Stomian. That's another video of 3 minutes that again I found on YouTube. It's not my video, but it really describes and maybe get the idea of the Stomian monastery in the wilderness. Because for him very important that he stays alone. He always used to get mad if he would be interrupted in his prayers. He used to communicate everything as a ring operator. He used to say that when you communicate with God, it has to be a clean communication. You can't have interferences. He used to compare it with bad frequencies on the radio, and he says you needed, or he needed, to be able to retreat for a long time to be able to communicate with the radio. I've taken my wife to Stomian 3 times. I think she doesn't want to come again unless she's staying there with a helicopter. It is not easy. There's of course no road there. Very interesting that Father Paisios left Stomian Monastery in 1962, 4 years later, and the monk that came after him, Mr. Kosmas, he was working in a bank, and he was the director of the bank of the Agricultural Bank of Greece in Konitsa. He left his bank life to become a monk and became the monk after Father Paisios. While I was researching 2 days ago to find some videos, etc., I found out that he passed away exactly 10 days ago at the monastery, very old, at 90-something, which was the same way I thought. It was how interesting that while I was trying to look up some Father Paisios, the next one was the Stomian monastery. That's the way. They have 4 monks in the monastery now. It's actually very touristic, I would say. There's actually many tourists that come all the way from Israel. I don't know why Israelis, but they love the area. Ioannis Paisios actually didn't like it that people would come to the monastery and camp and grill and barbecue, etc. He thought it was very distracting, and he felt, maybe I can show that little church up there was built 9 years ago, and this is the Panagia, and the little church up there is dedicated to Ioannis Paisios. There's another little coincidence from my life that I want to share. I was with my wife in 2015 in the Panegyric Convention in Phoenix, and there were various people from Greece, and there was a gentleman who was representing a Greek party from Northern Epirus, and we wanted the next day to go to the Saint Arsenios monastery in Arizona, and we took him with us. And it came out that this gentleman was the engineer and contractor who was building that little chapel of Paisios in the stone monastery, and he told us that in the car. So it was so crazy. We had actually walked to the monastery the summer before with my wife, and we had seen that they're starting to build something, but we didn't know what it was. And there we had, in the middle of Arizona, the engineer and contractor who was building that monastery in our car. It was very moving, yeah. And I urge you, if you can walk a bit, please do go to the monastery. It's the path there is the goal. That's how I always see it. Okay. Thank you. Father Paisios left Stonio to move to the Sinai Peninsula near Agia Katerini in Egypt and later to Ioannis to the Panagouda Skipi near the Konitsa monastery, where he stayed for the rest of his life and became a beacon and a lighthouse for humanity. What is a saint in the Orthodox faith? How is it to see a person you know be viewed as a saint? These are questions that arose 40 years ago in me, and I haven't been able to answer them until today. To become a saint starts at local level, the level of pious people venerating someone, believing that someone can help soothe their troubles, someone whose advice or spiritual help can make, in quotations, wonders. Beatification by simple and common people is what draws the attention to a gifted individual. This is what happened with Ioannis Katsimbaris. It came slowly, gradually, but steadily. He was a simple ascetic monk that I thought I and some other neighbors from Konitsa knew, and I was keeping him in my heart, slightly embarrassed to reveal that I felt comfort when I saw and talked to him. I look forward as a teenager to meet him, sharing my everyday experiences with him, whenever I happen to see him, which was not often, maybe once every 2 years. He gave me a simple but different perspective of my life. He commented on my Boy Scouts experience. He didn't like Boy Scouts. It had real reasons, but I'm not going to go into that. He commented on me thriving to pass my university entrance exams and my international Cappadocia diploma. He commented on going to school with multi-ethnic and multi-religious students. He commented on my political views, which were pretty extreme in the tumultuous years of 1988, 1989 in Greece. Told me that it is a blessing to be able to find my path through all these different ethnicities and religions, and should make me more robust in my beliefs, to look around in order to see the true God and find Jesus in my everyday life, no matter if I'm in Ioannis or in the middle of Manhattan. He taught me to always pray, no matter where I am geographically, and believe in my faith. He taught me to remember, to be humble, and try to love everything and everyone around me, people and nature. He taught me that I have to pray in order to communicate and ask God for help. No communication, no reply, no request, no help. It is simple, but also so hard. He taught me that belief is the absolute faith that the Pantodynamos God, as the creator of the physical order, has the power to change things at any given time, any way he chooses, whenever he chooses, that it helps or aids the soteria of the psychon, the savor of the souls of humans. In communicating with him, I learned that it is imperative to understand how he controls his own human dilemmas in order for me to be able to find a way to confront mine. Humbleness and humility, love and care for others, and my surroundings were repeatedly his main points. He told me that in order to come closer to God, we don't need to experience miracles. We need steps forward which we can take ourselves. Miracles will happen when they do. Γιαννάκη, μην περιμένεις τα θαύματα για να πιστέψεις. Θα έρθουν όταν είναι ανάγκη. Αλλά για τη σωτηρία της ψυχής σου πρέπει εσύ να κάνεις τα βήματα. Τα θαύματα δεν είναι αυτός σκοπός και δεν προσφέρονται για λόγους νοσηλωτικούς ή ψυχαγωγικούς. Όσο παράξενα και να ακούγεται, η πίστη κάνει θαύματα, αλλά δεν χρειάζεται θαύματα. Miracles are not goals in themselves. We should wait on them in order to believe, and they're not ideal for epistemological or recreational reasons, as weird as it sounds. Faith can cause miracles, but does not need miracles. It was weird or unusual for me to start hearing that he was known by others. To hear people in Brussels, where I lived at that time, unrelated to Konitsa or Epiros, to tell me about meeting him. To meet young Cypriot Boy Scouts on a trip to Scotland in 1986, get excited when they heard that my heritage is from Konitsa, and ask me if I ever met him. To hear a Russian fellow aerospace engineer working with me at the European Space Agency in Noordwijk in the Netherlands tell me that he was in Greece over the summer in order to meet a monk in Ioannis. And to hear that Father Paul Paisios had met him as a teenager at a trip to Ioannis back in the day. My Father Paisios, my in quotations, a star out there. I'm sure he's wanting me now to pray and repent for even remotely having possessional instincts and also depicting him as a star. The question is, what did Ioannis Paisios do to bring him closer to God and for God to hear him when he pleads for something? Δεν διαβάζω για να πάω εγώ στον παράδεισο. Δεν μπαίνεις διαβάζοντας στον παράδεισο για να έρθει. Διαβάζω για να πάτε εσείς στον παράδεισο, οι άλλοι. I am not studying the scripts to go to heaven. You don't go to heaven by reading. I read so that you can go to heaven, you all. That's what he used to say. Not only to me, but to others too. There's a lot to read about him and about what he said. I wouldn't call it preaching. In my eyes, he did not preach. He tried to explain God's words with his own simple words. He tried to live the way he thought God wanted him to in order to save others. Maybe that is why he was so appreciated. Because that simple kid from Farasa, growing up in Konitsa, not being highly educated, rather an autodidact, having a lot of health issues, growing up in very troubled times, had the gift to bring people closer to God by just telling things his way, the simple way. Last time I met him was in 1990 in Panauta. He told me this in his low inviting voice. Μη φοβάσαι, δεν πρόκειται να μας αφήσει ποτέ ο Θεός. Don't worry, God will never abandon us. Η μνήμη του θα είναι αιώνια. His memory will be true. I really apologize. I really want to apologize. I tried it today twice and I was crying the whole time. My wife was laughing. So anyway, I'm open to any questions. As I said, I'm not a theologist. I can't go into deep. It's better if you people read about his sayings. It's really simple what he said. What was very amazing was explaining everyday things, commenting on everything. He was a person that was interested in everyone and everything. He would comment to me, I'm a fan of Athens, of the soccer team, and he commented to me that he thought it was offending that they're using the Byzantine sign with the double eagles for their sign. And he said it shouldn't be a religion. He had opinion for everything and put it in simple words, always combining it with the Bible. Always finding a way to bring everyday life to the Bible. And I think that's what was appreciated with most people. That's why he's so famous. That's why he's such a tremendous person as a person. And of course, as a saint, I had a hard time to call the saint. I was calling Father Paisios, but he's a saint. And the last thing, my nephew is named after him. We were going to baptize him, my sister's son, Farvara's son. We were going to baptize him in June 2015, and he was going to baptize Ioannis. And in January 2015, they canonized Ioannis Paisios. So he's Paisios Ioannis. And he's very happy about it. He's getting my lady pride. Yes, any questions you have?
Just so you're not confused by the photo, obviously that's a composite photo because Saint Paisios is in a Don't get confused by that. It's not a good choice of picture, sorry about that. I would like to say that there is an Oronixio on the 11th of July to the 12th of July that he passed away in Suroti in Halkidiki. We have some people called Halkidiki here. I went for the first 9 years. I was trying to be there in July always. My parents were there all the way until 2014, until my nephew was born. Nowadays, there's over 3,000 or 4,000 people staying the whole night. It's incredible. I was last time in 2023. I didn't stay the whole night. I just visited with my ailing father. And it's incredible how many people he moved. And it's very interesting also that lots of people, Orthodox, not from Greece, but from other Orthodox countries, especially Ukraine, Russia, now that they are in war. You see lots of Ukrainians, lots of Russians, lots of Belarusians, Bulgarians, Romanians, Greeks from Australia, Greeks from the US, etc. And of course, lots of Konitsiotas. They have, I think, 8 or 9 buses that go to Suroti. They also now celebrate the new Saint Arsenios church in Konitsa itself, because the older people cannot travel anymore to Suroti. But if you can ever witness it, I would urge you to at least just go and venerate. If you want to venerate that night, his grave, you probably will have to wait 4 to 5 hours. So,
Questions? Yeah, you can't go anywhere.
Oh.
So the population exchange, it's my understanding in reading like Geronda Milianos from Simenopetra, I think he was a byproduct of his parents coming out of that population exchange. And it's my understanding that the people that came to Greece, like your grandparents, were kind of
Not my grandparents, the Father Paisios
parents, but your parents or your grandparents well came from there.
No, not mine.
But they were kind of scandalized by the way the Greeks that were in Greece lived the faith relative to what they experienced in Turkey. And I'm just wondering, and I thought that your grandparents were part of that as well, but in talking with your grandparents or with Saint Paisios' parents, did you ever get that understanding that...
Yeah, there's been lots of written about that. I don't think that's exactly the case. So you have to imagine all those people that came from minor races, not all, by the way, but most of them, especially, let's say, the Farasa, came from very provincial areas. So, especially like the Semendrians, who are here at St. George, I know your mother is, I think I'm in the Semendrians. Those were provincial areas, so they were very conservative areas, and they were in the middle of Turks around them, or Muslims around them, so they were very pious. Now, those people come to Piraeus, to a cosmopolitan center of Athens, where there is sin everywhere. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's, I think, where this perception comes from. The Constantinopolites, or this Myrmei, who moved over, I don't think they were shocked. They were just as moderate or frivolous believers, let's say, as the Athenians or the Thessalonians. The people in Konitsa were very pious. So I think the Pharisees in Konitsa probably blended and it was a good fit. But if you, as a refugee, were living in Stavroupoli, in Thessaloniki, or moved to, let's say, Kokinia, or the western refugee sites of Athens, Philadelphia, or Nea Chalkidona, then you were shocked, because you came from a very pious surrounding, and now you had people cursing the Panagia just because their day didn't go well. So that's where I think this misperception comes. It's not like that they were more pious in minor Asia than they were mainland Greece. It's just I think this kind of.
But obviously
This is my opinion.
there's some fruits of that, right? Obviously Paisios, I think, was one. Emilianos is maybe another.
That's true. But I mean, there's also, I guess, monks in Greece, lived in Greece, or I guess. Without, as I said, this is my opinion. Michael, don't take it for yes, please go.
So I know that monks that live in a monastery for most of their life do all sorts of different crafts, and I know that Saint Paisios was relatively a hermit for a lot of his life. Did you see him do any crafts like making prayer ropes or carving knives?
I did not, but he did, because he had a lot of things in the Pamabuda in his little cell. But he was a real hermit. Also, my grandfather used to say that they had totally lost him for years. So once he moved from Stomino, in Stomino, actually, he did didn't like it when people would go visit the monastery. He wanted the Paisios, but he noticed he needs their help to build the monastery. But he didn't like it that people would come and hang around there. He wanted them to come in order to venerate God and find some kind of peace. Father. So when he went into Sinai and came back, they had totally lost him. My grandfather was worried. His brothers and sisters were worried many times. So my father was waiting for the foreign ministry. They were asking the embassy or the consul general in Alexandria, who's also responsible for Agia Katerini in Sinai, if they had any communication with him, because they wouldn't hear from him. He was a real hermit, but I think in the later years when he noticed what good he can do by talking to people, I think that's where he started communicating his gift. And when he was praying in the Panaguda, he would be for partly 2 or 3 days just lying in front of the altar in his little cell. And he didn't care if people were ringing the bell or not. He wouldn't stand up. And he also used to tell me, he always told me to many people, but I heard it too, saying it to me and my grandfather, that he said when you're praying to God, you don't want to be disturbed. He used to compare things always to his radio operation things. And he used to say, for communicating, if you have a wrong frequency, it will hurt your communication. And so he was adamant about being heard.
Did he ever tell you if you got directly or whether God talked to you directly?
No, I have to say, not to me. And remember, I didn't talk to him that much. There is lots of writings about that. And I would say it's good to look into the literature.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh,
First of all, did he ever tell you that he spoke to God? Did he ever speak to you about his interactions with God? And your again sense.
yeah, so again, not to me, but I didn't, honestly, I didn't have many, especially when he was in the Panaguda, I would come and see him for half an hour, maybe come the next day for half an hour. And we wouldn't sit for too long, and there were so many people who would want to talk to him. It was when I was younger, and he would come to the house with my grandfather. Those were the times, but I was too young back then to appreciate all that. It was more like, another monk friend of my grandfather. He had another one, Zisis, a woman was Zisis, who had also become a hermit in Ioannis. He passed away there, he didn't communicate at all. He had seen, I think, too much that in the war and had abandoned the life outside of Ioannis. We had visited him too, but he was not very talkative. Well, Father Paisios, I think he wanted to talk, but he didn't have the time at the beginning. I think he was looking for his own communication with God, and it didn't start until later that he was.
So there are so many stories about him, and you can read about him. There are many, many books that have been written by now. We have some of them even in our bookstore. And also on the Mega, I think I told you, the channel Mega that comes from Greece has a whole video series now on the life of Saint Paisios.
Also on Daily Motion, you can find it.
On Daily Motion. Go to Daily Motion. You'll see them there too. So can I close with one little story I heard about Saint Paisios? Not one I saw with my own eyes, but just to make you laugh a little bit. So many people from all over would visit him, and Father Buddha there in Manaus, I was one of them. But anyway, this man who was an atheist came to see him. And Saint Paisios sat and talked to him, and they had a wonderful chat. They were just enjoying each other. So, so the Saint Paisios was talking about God, and so the man interrupted the saint and said, "Well, you know, Father, I don't really believe in God. No offense, but I just don't believe in him." And he said, "You don't believe in God?" He said, "No." He says, "Well, even the little, have you heard of a skink? Do you know what a skink is? Those little lizards that are about this big, you know what I'm talking about? They climb up on walls and everything. Anyway, a little skink was going by, and he says to the skink, he says, do you believe in God?" He says to the little skink. And the skink sat up on his back 2 legs, looked at Saint Paisios and this man, and if you know a little bit of Greek, you probably this. Which in Greek means yes. So, and then he scurried off, and then he looked at the atheist and the atheist like. So he had a sense of humor, and of course this interaction with nature was just his nature. He was that way. Anyway, thank you so much, Yanni. You really started yourself.
Sorry again for making it a beautiful night.
It was so precious to us, and your tears as well. Thank you to the whole Fallas family, as President said earlier, for hosting tonight. We do have a speaker next week,
Father John, from the monastery.
Father John Conkle. He's going to come and speak to us about Father Roman Braga, who has, I think he has actually been canonized. But anyway, or if he hasn't been canonized, it's just a matter of they're waiting for the right moment. So he isn't officially declared a saint yet, but many of us who knew him knew that he was a saint from a long time ago. He's a very holy man too. And someone that you may have met, you may have crossed paths with him since he lived here in Michigan. So we're going to have someone to talk to us about him next week. Thank you again for coming. Let's have a closing prayer, if we don't mind. Or you folks out this with me.
Lord of the powers, be with us, for in times of distress we have no other help but you, Lord of the powers, have mercy on us. Kyrie tondinameon methimonienum, alonare tosu poithon, entrixes inuceco me, Kyrie tondinameon eleison imas.
Lord Jesus Christ, through the prayers of Saint Paisios, bless us and keep us. Amen.
Amen.
So I know some of you have to leave early, but if you don't have to leave right away, some of you are doing it already. We have 2 garbage cans